Crafty friends, it's Jess from JessCrafts.com, and today I have a card featuring Isabel Christina digital stamps, but the main focus of today's video is how to create your own Slimline stencils. So Slimline cards have become very popular, and you can use standard stencils on them. It doesn't take too much extra work, but you will have to be careful about the edges and that kind of thing. So I thought for the kind of stencils that you might use a lot, like say clouds or like a grassy border, it could be really helpful to create your own stencils with some of the materials you might have on hand and some stencil material itself. Now, this is folk art stencil material. I picked it up at Michael's years ago and I haven't used it all, but I will link you to something similar. You can also use things like the plastic dividers that you might put in a notebook or some plastic packaging. A variety of things could work. You could also just use really thick cardstock. It won't last as long, but you can certainly get a few uses out of it. So what I'm going to do is I took my stencil material and I cut it to 9 by 4. And that's because I'm going to make a double-sided stencil, so I wanted it to be a bit bigger. I'm going to put 2 different sizes of clouds on it. However, I would have liked to make it longer. I think that while 9 inches does cover a slimline card, like with clouds, sometimes I personally like to not make sure they all like look exactly the same. So it can be helpful to have a stencil that's a little bit longer than your card. So maybe a 10 inch would be good. And the stencil material that I was working with was 12 by 12, so that is possible. And even if you were to use something like a divider, a lot of times those are 8.5 by 11. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a Lawn Fawn Puffy cloud die and I'm tracing it. There are a couple different sizes in the die set, and so this is another way to get a use out of my die. Now you might be wondering, why not just cut it with a die? Well, if you notice, that die has stitching. And so if you cut a stencil with a die with stitching, then those are going to leave those little stitching holes in your stencil and it's going to come through. If you want that, great. But I find even if you do it intentionally, it's a little inconsistent. So I prefer to just trace it and make a regular cloud border die with it. Or not border die, but border stencil. So that's going to be my choice. Now, if you don't have a die, maybe you have a stencil already and you just want to make a bigger one because it's much more convenient, or you can hand draw it, or you can go online and try to find like a silhouette of some clouds, print that out and trace that instead. I am tracing with a Sharpie marker because it will stay on the plastic, yet I can get rid of it later. So my hands might smudge it a little bit, which is fine, but I will still be able to cut this out with my scissors. However, I don't want this black line to be on it forever, so I'm going to be able to take some isopropyl alcohol or a Copic Zero refill and get rid of it. Any sort of like alcohol will be able to get rid of the Sharpie as an alcohol marker, like Copic markers are an alcohol marker, for instance. So you can also use hand sanitizer. I know a lot of those things are not easy to get right now, but I just have some on hand because I use it to clean my Copics. So anyway, here I am showing you that you could use a die instead. So this is the Lawn Fawn wave border die, and these don't have stitching. So in this instance, I will be able to just cut the stencil material with my die. I sent it through my Gemini. It's a, wafer thin Lawn Fawn die. So it is able to cut through that material. The material isn't that thick. So just another option. It did cut a little bit of like an uneven wave, but I can easily fix that by how I place it on my background. So I'll just show you how I finish up this card. Again, the main reason that I wanted to share this video was to just give you a heads up. If you were thinking like, gee, my stencils are a little tricky to use with this new Slimline thing, and I don't want to reinvest in stencils, just an idea. So I'm going to use a couple different Distress Oxide inks. Distress inks would work really well for this technique too. I will use my Picket Fence blender brushes, mostly because they're on my desk and I use the same blender brush for like all the oranges and yellows, and it's so much more convenient than all the little pads that you have for the distress inks, you know, with the traditional blending tool. And yeah, I just use them because they're there, but they also give a really soft, beautiful blend. I do like blending brushes. A lot of companies make great blending brushes. I find myself reaching for them quite often. I'm using Wild Honey, Carved Pumpkin, Ripe Persimmon, and Broken China. The logic here is that if you look at a sunset, you will see that there can be a lot of like oranges and pinks and yellows and stuff, but there is still blue often as well. And so I'm going to incorporate that. You could, of course, just do an orange and that'll look cool too. But I just wanted to do something different than a blue sky. So that's why I went with that sort of sunset look. As you can see, I'm not cleaning off my stencil in between. I'm not worried about the ink getting, the ink colors transferring from one cloud layer to the next. I actually want that in this particular instance because it will help them to blend. Now you can see there's a lot of white space left, and that's not exactly what I want, but I don't want to go too heavy with some of those darker colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Wild Honey, which is my lightest color, and I'm going to blend it all over the background. And in fact, I am being very careful in general not to have too much ink on my brush. So I'm often brushing some extra ink off onto the stencil or onto my craft sheet here to keep things light. So I'll start my blending off the paper and then come on, and that allows some of it to disappear. And again, not worried about the fact that my crafty surface here, my craft mat, has different inks on it because they're all from this project. And so if there's a little bit of blue or a little bit of orange, it's fine. So then I'm going to cut this with some Slimline scalloped dies from Cat Scrappiness. A lot of different Slimline dies out there. The dies I do think are worth purchasing. I don't know if there are Slimline stencils, but for me it was so easy to create my own, I decided not to. I took my Whimsy labels here. I will link all the products in the video description, and I was able to cut out one of the sentiments from the IsabelCristina digital stamp set. I will also let you know what colors I colored the dinos in, but I'm not going to share that with you today. I'm just trying to show you those stencils. So I hope that was helpful to some of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. As I mentioned, I'll leave a bunch of links to the different things in the video description below, and have an awesome day. Bye.